What if your spouse exchanged thousands of intimate messages with someone else every month, shared their fears, their frustrations, dreams, and their deepest desires? Would you consider that cheating? Now, what if I told you that person wasn't a person at all? Millions of people are now interacting with AI companions, and some users are spending hours a day building these relationships. Therapists, researchers, and divorce professionals are beginning to ask important questions that maybe would have sounded like science fiction even a few years ago. And that is, can a synthetic relationship threaten a real marriage? And can it actually harm a person to continue to use it? We're going to try to answer some of those questions today. I have the perfect guest to do this. Stacey Sanderson is my guest today. She is a psychotherapist, a coach, a counselor, a consultant, and a speaker with expertise in narcissism and complex trauma. And today we're going to put that expertise not aside because it's going to come into play here, but we're really going to focus on the role of AI in modern day life and living. So Stacey, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to get to this topic today.
I am too, because we were just talking before we got on the air. Stacey and I have both had clients over the last few years that have come forward with concerns about this, or that have actually been in relationships where a partner has been emotionally, whatever, connected with an AI companion. So we're not going to name any there's no specific platforms. This is not anything against any one platform out there. And there are good uses for AI. And we are also not providing mental health or legal advice. This is strictly for educational purposes. But Stacey, tell us a little bit about where you're seeing let's talk about the kind of the danger sides of AI, or how this plays in to relationships that may already be struggling.
Yes, I think much like a real affair or infidelity, it is the AI app being the place where the intimacy goes. So where once maybe two partners spoke to one another, one partner now retreats to their phone or to their computer. And I mean, it would look very similar to someone who's in another relationship and their main means of communicating is digitally.
Yeah, and this is where I think it gets a little, for people that aren't aware. My understanding is a lot of these AI companion systems are trained in some basic therapeutic skills and how to build rapport really quickly, and attachment theory, and they're trained in this stuff. So that, how would that impact how quickly a person might become kind of attached to this?
So I can answer that in two ways. I've experimented myself, and the language I get back is therapist to therapist, right? So the bot, if you will, is referring to itself as a therapist. So I've had that experience. And the other piece of this is that the whole attachment style topic is a very difficult one, in that you really do need to have an in-depth assessment in history from someone before you can begin expounding on what their attachment style is, right? So there are a variety of different tools you would use or assessments you would use in order to come by that information, right? So in my own work, I talk about the attachment blueprint, and I take a lot of time getting to know that from clients. But you certainly couldn't find it out from about a third party, right? Let alone the other person. And I was noticing in my own work with clients is attachment styles being treated like a diagnosis.
Right.
And it isn't. right? It may be part of a clinical assessment, but once you have that information, there's not a whole lot you can really do about it. But what I see is an attachment style being weaponized, or that information being used to characterize things in a very much inaccurate way. So if we've got a couple that are disconnecting emotionally, how convenient, right, for someone to go looking for that reason to be not their own coldness or indifference, but the other person's attachment style. So that's one of the things that I started noticing. And there are many therapists out there on social media who are starting to challenge this idea. I was in a training with someone not that long ago, a very well-known therapist who talked about how, he questions the validity of the concept of attachment style. So it is this weaponization or a convenient reason why people are behaving the way they do, but that was never the intention of that particular theory. And that's what it is. It's a theory. It isn't even, even as therapists, we take that information with a grain of salt.
Yeah, it's one component of what might be motivating a person. So let's talk about this whole idea from the person who is we can kind of see how you might, if you're lonely, if you're not feeling appreciated, if you're not feeling like your spouse is, if you're need to hear how perfect you are and your spouse isn't giving you that, you can see why you might turn to an AI companion who's just going to tell you whatever you want to hear. And the more that you say, this is what I need, the more they're going to give you. I could see that would be very appealing to maybe some people who fall on that narcissism, maybe psychopathic, antisocial personality disorder scale. But let's talk about the person who all of a sudden finds out that their partner is spending time and is sharing personal details of maybe not only their life, but their spouse's life with this AI system. What does that do for them? I mean, is that the same as catching your spouse in bed with somebody else? Like, is that the equivalent, or?
I actually think it may be worse. And the reason why I'm saying that is because, you've got your partner works with someone and they strike up a relationship and they're confiding in one another. And that's a fairly common dynamic, right? And due to proximity, that intimacy expands over time. That's very different than sitting down and feeding all of this information about your partner into a system that's then going to characterize them a particular way. It's a very modern, intimate form of a smear campaign, right? Not that everyone is going to hear it or read it or see it, but, there's also somewhat of an issue of consent, I suppose, if you go looking up all that information without asking to do so. But to me, it's a deeper layer of the tray.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing it's one of the easiest ones for the person who is talking to the AI companion. And some of these systems I understand, like I have not looked at them. I mean, I know the basic AI platforms for business use, but not for this personal side. But I understand that some of them are even like you talk to them and you can even create virtual characters that live in virtual settings. It's like it's kind of like a video game, like a role play game, but it's very personal and you can create the settings and and my understanding is that can be much more dopamine producing in the brain than even meeting somebody and having an affair with them, because they are at some point in time potentially just going to be another, I hate to say this, but it kind of another notch on your belt of somebody you've had sex with. Whereas this virtual character, you can keep reinventing them and recreating them. And I can see how it could get really distorted for people that maybe have some issues with that.
It's a bit of an echo chamber. And I think there are two types of people who would be vulnerable to this, I should say. those who are a bit lonely or struggle socially, or those who are being isolated within their relationship, and those who really need that form of validation, ego supply for self-regulation. So you mentioned the dopamine piece, right? I think in the beginning of a normal human affair, that's being fed by that dopamine, right? And that instant gratification and a few other hormones. But if it's instantaneous, right? And we're all kind of like rats in a maze with our buttons anyway, it's really going to feed that. And these are systems that are acting as digital mirrors. It mirrors back your language. It mirrors back what you're interested in. It's a bit sycophantic. So I think that would be a very powerful draw and also a very easy way to have those needs met.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking, when you mentioned that, I can even see how people may innocently start interacting with these. Like you said, if somebody is isolated, I know lots of people that live in very rural communities, up in northern Canada, even where sometimes they don't get out much because there's no place to go. If you get out, you're pretty isolated, right? And they do, everything's done online now. Telehealth, telemental health, everything is done online. So this isn't that far of a step. It's just You're not interacting with a human on the other end. You're interacting with this synthetic being.
Yes.
Yeah.
It reminds me when social media first came on the scene and people got pulled in, right? Whether it was playing games or connecting with people or seeing how many likes you got on a post. It reminds me of that in terms of our behavioral shift into it.
Right.
I think what's a little bit different about this is most of us go through our life without any of that kind of validation, right? That's most of us. And then some of us, if you've been in an abusive relationship, you've maybe started to question your reality, right? So you've experienced that form of manipulation where someone is always questioning you, never validating you. This particular platform really fills that need and fills that void. And that may not be entirely bad. That might not be entirely bad if there is solid database information.
Sure.
You're not always going to get that. I asked for that. I thought you know, right? But I can see where that would be very powerful. The other thing I'm curious about, and I've seen a little bit of this, is the Dunning-Kruger effect, where someone doesn't even know what they're talking about, but this is feeding that misinformation. So I'm hearing things like words being used incorrectly, concepts being used out of context. It's really interesting. And so I said this to you earlier, like in the therapy space, it's like there's a ghost in the room. There's a third entity. I also think some of the things I say to couples or to individuals is being plugged into.
Sure. Yeah.
Into this as well, right?
Right.
So it is this interesting and bizarre interface between humans and AI. But there are so many missing facets, right?
Yeah.
AI, like they don't even, as therapists, we have to say, I can't speak to a third party.
Right.
I can't give you characteristics of someone I've not met. If we map out some patterns, I can do that, but I can't characterize or diagnose or assess someone I've never met. That is not true.
Yeah.
For AI.
Well, yes. And we're seeing, so I've got to say this, I'm seeing more and more that, I've talked to a couple of people who have said, well, there's now virtual divorce coaching services out there. There are, there are people who use an AI platform to create their divorce decree.
Yeah.
There are professionals, we've heard those stories of lawyers actually presenting even to the Supreme Court and having AI do a hallucination about a legal case that never existed and it gets caught. And this is where I think the danger comes in is we give for some reason that AI information, whatever platform makes no difference, is becoming the gospel, and the actual humans that have done it for 30 or 40 years are no longer having value for their expertise and experience. And again, that's something else that, that does come up. And it's coming up all over the place now, in business as well as in personal.
Yes, I do think we're going to come through some interesting times in terms of people turning to AI. I mean, I would question the validity of anything generated by AI in court, or the validity for any, like, at any human level. But it really is information that isn't necessarily accurate,
right,
and is echoing,
yeah,
the individual speaking,
right.
So hopefully, when people are engaging in this kind of activity, they have a level of awareness, because there are no disclaimers on AI except at the bottom where it says this does,
it may make mistakes.
Yes, it makes mistakes. That's not the same as saying, this does not replace.
Right.
That's a very human thing. That's a very human thing, right? I may make mistakes. That's very different than a disclaimer.
Right.
I make mistakes.
And we have insurance to cover those mistakes. But yeah, and that's the thing. There is no, I mean, it's really used at your own risk. And here's the thing that and again, there are very good uses for it as well. So this is not, a talk about how awful it is. It's a cautionary tale about how, when we're going through, particularly with relationships, and I took us a little bit down a rabbit hole there, but particularly with relationships, that turning to AI or recognizing that your partner is using AI at a level to fill in the gaps for the human connection, that's really a concern. Have you had clients come and actually express that, or is that something that maybe people aren't even expressing at this point because they don't know how to talk about it?
I've had a handful of clients express it. I've encountered it a little bit more in social media spaces, right? In those kinds of conversations. I would be very curious to know, as a clinician, what the leap of faith is between, seeking information and validation and actually engaging with a digital avatar. I don't think it is a big leap.
Right.
Where I think this impacts relationships is in the profound amount of bias that would be happening as AI is giving you back information without having all of the facts or even knowing the other person.
Right.
So it's so, one of my friends actually sought out my opinion about this because she described it as being very narcissistic, which sometimes it can be. But I believe that the nuance of human emotion, the lack of context, the lack of history, you could blatantly lie to AI. They're not going to, it's not going, they're going to need their own pronoun.
Yeah.
It's not going to have any of that context. And it's the isolation and I was thinking the obsessive and compulsive nature of it. Right. Because I think that in real time, it plays out as a highly impulsive, but also obsessive and compulsive, not in the clinical sense. Right. But it plays out like that. So just in a similar vein as online shopping or online gambling, this is our next frontier of learning how to take care of ourselves. But I do think it's a very self-regulating activity.
Well, I was gonna say, so this would probably be back in the late 1990s when kind of the whole idea of like way back, what was it? MySpace and like some of those even before Facebook was available, there was these communities where people could get online and talk and hook up and do all kinds of things. And I actually worked with a lady who got very addicted to spending time online in these virtual rooms. And it was nothing sophisticated like it is today. It really wasn't. And I don't even think a lot of them some of them didn't even have cameras. It was just audio. There wasn't, webcams weren't really all that popular way back when. And she would literally get off work, go home and spend 6 or 8 hours talking to people virtually from around the world. And she talked about them at school. Oh, oops. Now you know where I was. At my workplace. That was, it was like they were her friends, it was like she was binge watching a TV show and then talking about the people like they were really living in her community. And it was a little weird. I remember people talking about it and saying, this is weird. And now she was one person, but I know that addiction with, the perfect, because you create this image of what you think that is, even though it's a virtual thing, it loses that virtual and it becomes very realistic for us.
Like when my kids played Sims on the PlayStation, right? They're creating this imaginary world. And, there's, I think if you're sitting in front of your phone or your computer screen, what's active in that is your own imagination, right? You're imagining this entity, I think, right? As human beings, we're going to give it human characteristics. And so many people, as you've probably heard, have terrible experiences with virtual dating, online dating, or those apps. But you won't have that.
Right.
If you're communicating with AI, right? It is just going to tell you everything that you want to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Stacey, I think we've covered a lot of this, and this wasn't by no means meant to be super comprehensive. And I know that there is some research that's being done now. I know that there are, statistics that you can get, believe it or not, from AI platforms. Just ask them; they'll tell you how many hours people spend interacting with these virtual companions, or sometimes they're called synthetic relationships. Yes. And I think this is something that that. Not that you have to worry about if you're in a healthy relationship, and not that you have to worry about generally, but I think it is important to be aware of this situation. And especially if we're going through times when we're feeling lonely or we're feeling isolated, that there can be a healthy way to turn to AI for some support, but there can also be an unhealthy and potentially even sort of addictive side to it that we have to be careful of.
Most definitely. And I think the more stressed you are or isolated you are, the more vulnerable you're going to be. And then the other side of that is if someone is really dedicated to getting validation about a third party, right? Or they want their own opinions validated.
Right.
Okay. And I'm not an expert on this, but I would think that the more you use it, the more information, the system has.
Right.
The more sophisticated or meaningful their answers are going to become. And I think it's going to be incumbent on all of us to create appropriate boundary structures around this, right?
Yeah. Stacey, I think that was a great way to wrap this up. And I so appreciate you coming on and talking about this, because this is relatively new. A lot of research needs to be done into it. And there's a lot of things that I'm sure are going to come out a little bit later. So if you have anything, any last words of wisdom you want to share with us?
I really would say, I'm going to just repeat what I said, that it's incumbent on all of us to develop healthy boundaries and limits and awareness around using these platforms.
Great. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment because we will be looking back and we will certainly get you an answer.